So this is where you're reading from. And the microphone, you can put your notes here. The microphone's a pretty good microphone. It picks up pretty easily. If you get too close, you start popping.
You start reverberating or whatever, or something.
I keep thinking that we're not reverberating anymore, so I think we're good. It's just if you get too close, you make
Okay.
that. Yeah. So if you want to just try it out real quick.
Do you want me to keep the green bag with me, or do you? I think it's okay there. Isn't it? Is it? You never know. Okay, standing like this.
Yep,
Is that good?
That is good. Thank you.
Like this, so they can see people.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So I
definitely
can,
if you'd like.
Can
you
I move it? I can move it. Let's do that.
Yeah. So
Let's
there
do
you go.
that. But Bill goes first.
Yep.
Right. And who does the readings?
Ken Allen and I are doing the readings. So Ken is
And
reading.
should I like introduce Claire, who comes after me, or how,
You
who's
can if you'd like.
introducing us, or are we just getting up?
We're
or-
just getting up, and your names are in the bulletin,
so they can figure it out.
you can figure it out. I mean, I could do it if you like, but
No, that's okay. I mean, I can.
I'm not much of an MC. And Claire is. I saw.
Claire is
but then she
here.
disappeared.
She's in the.
If you see her before I see her, 'cause I've got to go change. If you'd let her know this is where you're doing this from.
I will let her know.
Thank you very
I
much.
will. Bill? So the trick is to make sure we don't trip.
He was here. We sort of pivoted in case there's some folks here. And so, we turned it so people can face. And microphone right about here. You good? Get too close, you're starting to get that popping noise. I invite you to stand in body or spirit for the first hymn. God be with you. Together, let us pray. O God of grace and glory, we remember this day our sister Sylvia. I want you to be seated.
We have come together today to honor the memory of my wife, Sylvia Peterson, who died 2 weeks ago in our home just a few blocks from this church. As most of you know, she led a long, remarkable life and was intellectually and physically active almost to the end. And for many of us, her departure has created a gap very difficult to fill. Sylvia came from an interesting family background. Her father, Dale Wallace, was a farm boy from Mount Calm, Texas, who displayed unexpected and surprising academic talent. While he was a graduate student at Yale, Dale Wallace met and married Marguerite Kroll, the daughter of a New Hampshire physician. Sylvia's mother was a graduate of Radcliffe College, and as anyone who ever met her will testify, had an exceptionally strong personality. Marguerite came from a long line of New Englanders, and it is still not entirely clear how in New Haven she got together with an academically precocious young man from Texas. but they seem to have had, on the whole, a happy marriage with 3 children. Sylvia, the oldest, George, who became a professor and a lawyer, and Zara, the somewhat mysterious younger sister who nearly completed a PhD in English at the University of Rochester before devoting the rest of her life to various spiritual pursuits. Sylvia spent most of her childhood years on the western edge of Detroit, where her father taught at Wayne State University. However, during the summers, the Wallace family usually lived in either New Haven or Farmington, Connecticut, near the home of Wilmarth Lewis, the world's leading collector of material relating to Horace Walpole, an eminent 18th century English literary figure to whom Dale was to devote much of his life. It's easy to see that Sylvia grew up in a scholarly world that shaped her interests and her own academic career. Sylvia followed very closely the patterns set by her parents. Like her mother, she earned a bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, at Radcliffe College in 1958, returned home briefly to complete a master's degree at Wayne State, and then, emulating her father, plunged into a PhD program in English at Yale. She was awarded a doctorate in 1963. Her first teaching appointment was at Detroit Institute of Technology, rapidly followed by Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, and the University of Maryland. Meanwhile, Sylvia had met and married Milne Holton, a fellow graduate student at Yale from Tennessee. Sylvia and Milne almost immediately fell into a pattern of spending long periods of time teaching at European universities, beginning in the mid-60s with Uppsala University in Sweden, a model that they were to follow for decades. I couldn't possibly reconstruct a list of all the academic institutions they became associated with during those years. But Sylvia, by then an English professor at the University of District of Columbia, with which she was associated for more than 30 years, somehow also found time to write or edit 3 books during her first marriage. And when she and Milne were at home on the Hill, she maintained a lively social calendar and developed an exceptionally warm circle of friends in Washington and elsewhere. And not least, she often climbed European mountains during the summer. I should add that I first became acquainted with Milne, one of my colleagues in the University of Maryland English department, when he asked me to visit his home so that I could offer some technical advice about his new computer, which, despite his obvious brilliance, he found utterly baffling. On that occasion, I met Sylvia for the first time. She at once struck me as exceptionally friendly and attractive. Milne soon became the closest male friend of my adult years, and Sylvia was, of course, usually there too, slightly in the background, charming, but modest and apparently rather deferential. I should add that throughout her 2 marriages, and even back into her childhood, Sylvia was also always accompanied by 1 or more dogs. It was not accidental that, that at the very moment of her death, the latest dog in our lives, named after Geoffrey Chaucer, was lying on the floor next to the bed. When Sylvia passed away unexpectedly in January, or Milne, I should say, passed away unexpectedly in January 2000, Sylvia turned to me for help in editing and designing a memorial booklet about him. And from that point onward, our friendship gradually evolved into a closer connection. In 2003, we were married here at St. Mark's. For quite a few years, we continued to spend most of our summers at the house she and Milne had bought in Sayon, France. However, after Milne's death, Sylvia had decided not to resume teaching, and I retired also in 2004. Thus, we now both had more time to travel in Europe and to collaborate on some scholarly projects. In 2011, we co-authored a very lengthy census of all the known copies of the Kelmscott Press edition of Chaucer. And in 2018, we published a book about another private press, the Daniel Press in Oxford. Meanwhile, we were also working together on an ambitious website, still being actively maintained today, describing the personal library of William Morris. Sylvia was always extremely modest and unassuming about her editorial work, but in fact she plunged into several major undertakings that could never have been brought to conclusion without her. Relatively late in life, she became a scholar of considerable reputation. More importantly, she was a remarkable human being, generous in relationships with her numerous friends, colleagues, and neighbors. I fell in love with her and married her because in my own long life I had never met another person of such wide sympathies and interests, such magnanimous impulses, and such unselfish instincts. I will miss her enormously. It is a comfort to remember her today among her friends and family and in the church where we began a happy life together. Thank you for joining me in honoring the memory of an extraordinary woman, my wife, Sylvia Wallace Peterson. We were married here. Her friends and loved ones mourn her here. May she rest in peace.
I met Sylvia 50 years ago. She was bouncing down A Street past my house, headed for one of the big libraries at the end of the block, stopping to patronize my young son's front stoop jam and jelly concession. And I thought she was very pretty. And she grew in stature physically. She seemed to grow taller physically as she aged. One of the people in our hiking groups described her as the grande dame of the hiking group, and she really was. She took to the trail as though she was leading a procession. She wasn't hunched over her pack like most people. And she was also very serious, as Bill said, about what she did. And I remember one time she mentioned to my sister that she was working on a book, and my sister said, oh, what's the book about? And Sylvia said, well, you wouldn't be interested. It's a scholarly work. So I think she was right on, that my sister was not interested, but I can't imagine anyone else who would have said that. And she was critical of her dogs also, not her dogs, other people's dogs. Because we passed a couple with a dog crossing a stile on the Pembrokeshire Coast Walk, and there was something funny about the dog because I asked Sylvia, I said, what kind of a dog is that? And she said, oh, it's a Yorkshire, but it's not a very good one. And you knew how she felt, okay? We realized fairly early on that both of our husbands at the time had been in the same law school class, and so we began a friendship with them. And one evening at dinner, we were carrying on about this walk we had just taken, the Office Dyke walk in England. It's a long-distance footpath. And we were very excited about it. We'd just gotten home, and Milne said, well, why don't you all walk in France, and Sylvia will go with you. And a lot of people, when you say you want to go walking or do something and exciting or interesting, will say, gee, I really want to do that. I've always wanted to do that. Sylvia never said, gee, I always wanted to do that. she would show up with a book, a guidebook, and say, how about the Tour de Mont Blanc? Or the GR5. It goes from Amsterdam to Nice, but you don't have to do it all at once. So we did about 25 long-distance walks, and most of them were instigated by Sylvia after the first few. Forget where I am. She always had an idea of what we were going to do next. We finished a walk in July. She was ready for the next year. She had chosen one or two books that the rest of us could look at. So here. Now, I would have probably completed no more than a few of these books if it weren't for Sylvia's motivation and enthusiasm. We both lamented that we hadn't begun hiking sooner in life. So enter Gary Abrecht, who, with among other things, planned week-long Appalachian Trail section hikes. He had a very tight-knit hiking group of people who showed up all the time. Nobody backed out. And Sylvia induced Gary to take me on as a member of this group, which is why I was involved at all in it. Sylvia's responsible for my being in this group. And I got, when the group went on other trips besides the Appalachian Trail, and there was a Swiss trip that I elected not to go on. It had been planned by one of Gary's friends, and Sylvia said to me, "You're not going on the Swiss trip?" And she seemed to grow 3 or 4 inches. And she said, "You were the only one who was invited who is not going." So I said, no. Nevertheless, we remained friends. She was very generous to me with everything she had and her good humor, and I am very sad to lose her, but that's the way things go. Thanks for the good times.
A reading from 1 John. See what love the Creator has given us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. The reason the world does not know is that it did not know God. Beloveds, we are God's children. What we will be has not yet been revealed.
I think you know what most of this list is that I'm about to read, but food, books, dogs, travel, hiking, theater. I don't think we've hit theater yet. Film, photography. The list is endless. Sylvia's interests were broad and deep. I'm not sure when I actually first met Sylvia. I'm her sister-in-law, but it must have been sometime around 1996, which, when I hear that time, I go, that's like pretty recent. And then I think, no, actually that's almost 30 years. But there it is. And I began taking the train from Philadelphia down to DC to see her brother George. And Sylvia, I guess she was around 60 then. And hers really, it looked like an idyllic life, with living the academic schedule, spending summers in Seyon, and the shoulder seasons at Pilot Point. It just looked wonderful. At that time, she had Magda and Marius, 2 dogs. Marius was the one who bit me. And he bit other people too. But she loved him. And of course, there was Milne, who did not bite me, but I think he did bite other people. I'm not sure about that. But on our first visit to Pilot Point, when George and I were first together, was typical Sylvia. She had invited us down for the weekend to spend some time at the beach, to do some hikes, to see Lewis, have some wonderful meals, which one always did with Sylvia, to do a little bit of outlet shopping. And unbeknownst to me, we also had to do a little plumbing. I wasn't aware of that. So the first thing I found when we got there was that we went, pulled out some wrenches and other things, and a flashlight. We crawled under the house at Pilot Point, into the sandy soil and the dark, me holding a flashlight, George holding a wrench and doing whatever tools that he needed to fix the plumbing. A couple hours later, we were able to come out. We could finally go see the beach. And we then, of course, had wonderful meals and had a wonderful time for the rest of the weekend. But that was my first major encounter, I think, with Sylvia, and of course, many wonderful ones after that. But little did I know where our lives would really lead and what, over the years, we would end up sharing. Somewhere along the way, Sylvia became as much family to me as my own. Of course, we were both from Stowe, New England stock, which meant really neither one of us shared too much, but we did share. And I was very lucky, I think, in many ways. I got to know Sylvia behind her stoic facade, and maybe, I think it might have been a more vulnerable Sylvia in some ways, but that's a word that I do use with caution and a lot of footnotes, because it's not really a word that one would attribute very often to Sylvia. But we both had very full lives. Ironically, what really did bring us together so often was death, because first it was Milne, then it was her mother Marguerite, then my husband George, then George's son, her nephew Matt, then her sister Zara, and finally Sylvia herself. That was sort of the course of the time that we spent together. And I know she felt each death very deeply. I don't think it ever really prepared her for her own, because she fought that with her inimitable fortitude that we all know so well until she really couldn't do it anymore. But Sylvia was always a paragon of strength and good manners, a gracious hostess with an insatiable desire and ability to create fabulous meals. When Bill, who I believe was a wonderfully calming influence in her life, when he came fully into her life, he could never quite understand, and I think this goes back to a few things you have already heard a little bit. He could never understand how we would talk about food so much, that we would sit down for a meal, and before we took the first bite, we would be talking about what we were going to cook for the next meal. And always planning ahead, making sure that everything was going to be as wonderful as it could be. And of course, it always was. So that was a big part of her life. And I think that the cooking and other things that she did were really her way of showing love and the way that she really shared with others, and all highly valued. She shared through so many activities. Her photography, I have countless family photographs. They're wonderful photographs that she took over the years. And the books that she gave at Christmas, always with a clipped out review from the New York Times Book Review. And I kept all of them. I read them. They were wonderful. I find A World Without Sylvia, which is what we have now. And I know Sylvia's not happy about that, but she would expect us to deal with it. Have a bourbon, try a new recipe, go for a hike, maybe go to an opera, deal with it. Get on with things as best you can. We have to get on as best we can in a world, I'm going to add a couple names to this, I think, Bill, a world without Sylvia, Crowell, Wilson, Wallace, Holton, Peterson. Did I get them all in there? I think. And I do believe, when all is said and done, that it was, in fact, the Peterson that made her happiest. And I think, what a way to go. So, yay, Sylvia. And yay, Bill.
I get pie. This is so exciting. Okay. I'm Claire. I'm her niece. And my sister, Suzanne, is also here. So I'm going to tell you about the memories I have of my Aunt Sylvia. After all, that's why we're here at a memorial service. We come together to share memories, to build as complete a picture about the deceased loved one as we can, each of us contributing a thread, a facet of who we experienced Sylvia to be. So to help place you in the timeline of her life, My memories of Aunt Sylvia probably begin around 1990, when I was 6 and she was 54. She was more than halfway through her life by the time we met. As a young child, I don't remember much because I was a young child, but I do remember the sweaters she knit and the beach at Pilot Point. And then we traveled together. And Aunt Sylvia wasn't cuddly, but she did take me on great trips. Because of her, my sister and I can tell you about going to the south of France as kids. The south of France as kids. I can tell you about hiking the coast of Pembrokeshire as an 11-year-old. The summers I spent on Cape Cod with Aunt Sylvia and my grandmother, which sometimes felt like an obligation, but were also filled with swimming and summer camp, knitting, children's theater, and playing in my grandmother's garden. Because of her, I feel no guilt about the number of cookbooks I have. I feel validated. I felt validated by our shared love of dessert. Why offer your guests one dessert when you can offer them two? The year she asked me, a teenager, to make dessert for a holiday family gathering felt like I had won admittance into a secret society of ambitious home cooks. I can probably count on one hand the number of times my aunt said, "I love you," to me. That sounds like a dig at her, but I don't mean it to be. Aunt Sylvia didn't tell you she loved you. That would be too obvious. She showed you with a sweater, with a photograph, and eventually with a gluten-free cake for my dad. I don't think she really believed that he was actually allergic to gluten for like years, but eventually she accepted it. Now that I'm older, I have more compassion for her Yankee approach to emotions. I don't know very much about what she wrestled with in life, but I know she did, because we all do. There's a Hebrew phrase often uttered when talking about the dead, Zikrona Livekra. May her memory be a blessing. Not all the memories of my aunt felt like blessings when created. It was annoying that I always got a book instead of a My Little Pony for Christmas. But when I look at my life and when I live it, I see her fingerprints, and I'm so thankful. Last night, I had friends over for dinner. My approach to dinner parties is a tad more casual than my aunt's, but we ate with her silverware, drank wine, and ate cake. May her memory be a blessing.
From Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace.
Good afternoon. I'm Maureen Shea, an A Street neighbor of Sylvia and fellow dog lover. Our neighbor, Mary Ramshaw, said of Sylvia, she was the icon of A Street, and that's so true. Sylvia lived on our block for over 50 years, and in that time saw many of us come and go, but mostly come and stay. Another neighbor, Janice Delaney, remembers Sylvia and I taught in the English department at George Mason College of the University of Virginia between 1968 and 1970. We both left, we thought, temporarily. Then were not invited back for reasons both sexist and illegal today. Her remarkable career at UDC for years thereafter showed how foolish the good old boys at UVA had been to let her go. And her generous, hospitable, kind, inspiring, and friendly presence on A Street ever since have shown how lucky I and all the rest of us were that she stayed here. While she loved her homes in France and Lewis, Sylvia was quite proud to be the longest resident of our block. As some of you know, there are two dynamics on our block, the 500 block. The north side has an alley behind the houses, and those living on that side mostly go in and out through the back garden. Those of us on the south side have no alley, and thus very much live in the front with many opportunities to interact. An interesting dynamic has come from that. As another neighbor, Jean Barry, says, we're like the village green of Louise Penny's Three Pines. We know each other's coming and going, successes and challenges. At a literary feast Ken and I hosted some years ago, a guest put a name to it. She said, you have a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. Yes, it is a term for a geographically defined area that organically becomes dense with seniors. They come when they are younger and they stay. Friday night dinners became regular over the years, some at restaurants, some pizza nights at our homes. 2 pizza nights brought fire trucks. Same address, different owners. While we know Sylvia liked fine wine, I can also tell you that she very much enjoyed the margaritas at La Plaza and Las Positas. Thanks to those dinners, we shared Bill and Sylvia's work as they researched and wrote their book, tracing the known surviving copies of the works of Chaucer published by William Morris's Chelmsford Press in 1896. This involved research and detective work in England and beyond. It was a delight to listen to them as they spoke about it and to see its completion. May I add that many of us admired not only all of that, but the fact that a couple could not only survive that intensity of working together, but clearly enjoy it. Throughout her cancer treatment, Sylvia never complained and mostly refused any help. She was not shy about declaring, you know, I am a very independent person, as if we didn't know that already. She continued with exercise and yoga classes, shaming those of us who would make any excuse not to attend. She continued to shop regularly at Eastern Market and Trader Joe's, and to faithfully walk Jeffrey, although we could gauge how she was feeling by the length of the walks. Bill, who hates hospitals and doctors in the extreme, was chauffeur and loving companion without complaint. Sylvia was brave, and so was he, and he was patient. Her neighbors and friends broke through her independence a bit in offering to bring food. This was brave on our part, as she was an excellent cook, as you've heard, and not loath to criticize food she felt was inferior. The following scene was repeated multiple times. Call to Bill, would you like any food? Bill responds, oh, no thank you, the refrigerator is full. We have plenty. Wait somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes. Call from Sylvia. We don't have any food. What were you going to bring? A footnote. I saw that fridge. Bill was right. It was usually full. I think she wanted to know what was on the menu. Sylvia was many things: teacher, scholar, collector of quilts and posters, breeder of champion dogs, hiker, gourmet cook, and more. Most importantly to us, she was a wonderful neighbor, and we will all still imagine her with Jeffrey rounding the corner to 517 on one of their many walks.
Just for the record, I'm not Joy Pohl. I'm Jean Berry. Joy was supposed to be here to tell you these stories in person. She wanted to. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency and could not be with us today. She asked me to read this for her. So pretend I'm Joy. I have 4 stories about Sylvia that I would like to share. 2 are about my dogs, and 2 are about food. Many of you know Jeffrey, Sylvia's beloved Havanese and one of the sweetest dogs on the hill. But long before her foray into toy breeds, Sylvia was seriously into herding dogs, raising many champion French Briards and Hungarian Poolies. The first Briard I met was Sylvia's debonair champion, Eve. After Eve, Sylvia acquired Marius, who made up in rambunctiousness what he lacked in Eve's easy charm. And he's the subject of my first Sylvia dog story. One weekend, Sylvia had to make an unexpected trip to Tennessee, and she asked if my partner Fran and I could walk and feed Marius. Of course, we said. Well, she replied, you know he can be a handful. 4 handsful, I would say, because this is how we walked Marius. First, we attached 2 leashes to his collar. Then we each walked on opposite sides of him, belaying the leashes by bringing them around our waist so that we used our weight to control his lunging. We never told this story to Sylvia because we thought she would be horrified to learn that it took 2 of us with belayed leads to accomplish what she did with 1 lead and a commanding voice. My second dog story is about Sylvia's champion Poolie, Magda. If you have never seen a Poolie, imagine a Scottish terrier with dreadlocks. Magda was also an AKC champion and even won Best of Breed at the Westminster Dog Show, a feat that got Sylvia's name in the New York Times. Magda had many successful litters, all whelped in Sylvia's whelping box in her basement. My story, however, is about Magda's last litter. One of her pups was born blind, and Sylvia worried and fretted about finding this blind pup a home where he could receive the love and care he deserved. It took Sylvia 6 weeks past the placement of all his litter mates, but she worked assiduously until she found him a proper home. Now for the food stories. Sylvia was a gifted chef, and many of us over the years have enjoyed the fruits of her labors. I particularly remember well the first meal that I enjoyed at her table. Sylvia had a house in the village of Sayon in Provence, and Fran and I rented it for a couple of weeks. By the way, there's a wonderful coffee table book called The Most Beautiful Villages in Provence, and Sayon is one of the featured villages. Sylvia's house was built into the wall surrounding the village, had 3 to 5 foot stone walls itself, was as cool as a cave, and its 4th story balcony had magnificent views of the valley and the Maritime Alps. At any rate, Sylvia had us over to acquaint us with the history of the house and its features. What she prepared for us was a fabulous meal of lamb shanks, the first I had ever had. I looked at the great blackened hunk of meat on my plate and asked Sylvia, "What is this?" "Lamb shanks," she replied. I have since ordered them several times on those rare occasions where you find them on the menu, but none have ever measured up to Sylvia's. They live on in my memory, acquiring the kind of legendary status some attribute to their mother's apple pie. My second food story is one of more recent vintage, coming when Sylvia was in the throes of chemo. One afternoon about 3 p.m., Sylvia called and said she was having a problem with her Cuisinart and wondered if I could come have a look. "Of course," I said, "and if we can't fix it, you can borrow mine." When she opened the door, I found her entire first floor perfumed with the most delicious aroma. After we fooled around with the Cuisinart and figured out together how to fix it, I asked what she was cooking that smelled so delicious. She reached into her oven, pulled out a Dutch oven, and lifted off its lid to reveal, nestled on a bed of mirepoix and fresh herbs, 2 duck legs. Their skins a rich, succulent golden brown. "Oh my," I said, "what a wonderful supper you'll have." "Oh no," she said, "the recipe calls for the duck to sit overnight in the refrigerator and be reheated the next day. This is tomorrow's supper." I have her recipe, and it does indeed call for an overnight cooling, but it is hard to believe that many have the fortitude to follow it. Sylvia is also the only home cook I know to have prepared Julia Child's cassoulet. I tried it once, didn't finish. I don't know if you know the recipe, but if you wanted to serve it, let's say next weekend, you should have started sourcing the ingredients and preparing them last month. Sylvia was a wonderful cook and a wonderful host, a loving neighbor, and a lovely friend. We're so fortunate to have had her in our lives for as long as we did.
invite you to stand as you're able and body your spirit. Our prayers of the people are on page 5. At the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember her. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of the winter. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring. At the blueness of the sky and the warmth of summer. At the rustling of the leaves and the beauty of the autumn. At the beginning of the year and when it ends. As long as we live, she too will live. When we are weary and in need of strength. When we are lost and sick at heart. When we have decisions that are difficult to make. When we have joy we crave to share. When we have achievements that are based on hers. For as long as we live, she too will live. I want to make sure that you know that the family and the friends gathered are inviting you to a reception. So back through that door, down the hallway, and into our parish hall. I hear there is food and drink. There was a lot of plates going in that I saw. So please know that you are welcome to come and tell a story as part of this. And the last thing I want to do is thank a few people. I want to thank David and Charlie, who at the very last minute stepped in to do our live stream. It's an all-volunteer ministry here, and usually they like a little more notice, and they're good sons of the hill, and of course they wanted to do it, so here they are. And I want to thank Maureen and Jean and Susan and Catherine for helping us organize all this. And I want to thank all of you, because often we have services here of people I don't know, and I knew Sylvia very briefly. She had always thanked me very kindly for the music that we had performed here. I always knew who she was, because Catherine's right, she was the tallest human being I've ever met. She'd like lean down and tell me how much she enjoyed it. But what you've done is painted a really beautiful portrait of a life, and a life that touches others. So it was a gift for me to sit here and listen, and I want to thank all the speakers for painting a really full portrait. And with that, our hymn is on page 6. Life is short, and we don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those who make the journey with us. So be swift to love, and make haste to be kind. And the blessing of God, who made us, who loves us, and who travels with us, be with you now and forever. Amen. Let us go forth from this place holding all that Sylvia shared with us. Thanks be to God.